You've embezzled over $900,000 from this community. Kara? And now, the IRS knows everything. I slid the folder across the conference table, watching the color drain from her face. Did you really think you could hide offshore accounts from a federal tax investigator? My name is Barbara Chen, and I've worked as a senior investigator for the Internal Revenue Service for the past 12 years. I've taken down corporate executives, celebrity tax cheats, and organized crime syndicates, but I never imagined I'd be using my skills to expose the biggest fraud in my own backyard. It was April 2024 when my husband Mark and I moved into Riverside Gardens, a planned community in suburban Phoenix. The neighborhood was beautiful manicured lawns, a gorgeous community center with a pool and tree-lined streets that looked like something out of a magazine. The HOA fees seemed reasonable at $250 per month, and the property values were strong. Our real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Linda, handed us the keys with a bright smile. "You're going to love it here," she said. "The HOA is very active. They really keep things nice." I should have paid more attention to the warning in her tone. We met Karen Westbrook at our first HOA meeting in May. She was the association president, a woman in her late 40s, with platinum blonde hair styled in an aggressive bob, designer sunglasses perched on her head even indoors, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She wore a white pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The meeting was held in the community center's main hall, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pool area. About 30 residents sat in folding chairs arranged in neat rows. Karen stood at a podium at the front, flanked by 2 other board members, her vice president Doug, a nervous-looking man in his 60s, and treasurer Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who seemed half asleep. "Welcome to our new residents," Karen announced, gesturing toward Mark and me with a practiced wave. "We're so glad to have you joining our little family here at Riverside Gardens. As you'll quickly learn, we maintain very high standards in this community." Her eyes locked onto mine, and something about her gaze made my investigator instincts tingle. In my line of work, you develop a sixth sense for when someone's hiding something. Karen had that, looked the same, overly confident demeanor I'd seen in dozens of tax cheats who thought they were too smart to get caught. "Now, let's discuss our upcoming special assessment," Karen continued, clicking to the next slide on her presentation. "As you can see, we need to make some urgent repairs to the community center roof. The cost will be distributed among all homeowners $3,500 each, due by June 1st. A murmur rippled through the crowd. An older gentleman in the third row raised his hand. "Karen, we just paid a special assessment last year for landscaping. That was $4,000. And didn't we have another one 6 months before that?" Karen's smile tightened. "Yes, Harold, maintaining a community of this caliber requires ongoing investment. If you'd prefer to live somewhere with lower standards, I'm sure there are plenty of neighborhoods that would suit you better." Harold shrank back in his seat, properly chastised. I noticed several other residents exchanging uncomfortable glances, but no one else spoke up. After the meeting, I approached the refreshment table, where someone had set out store-brand cookies and weak coffee. Karen materialized beside me, her perfume overwhelming in the small space. "Barbara, isn't it?" she said, extending a manicured hand. "What brings you to Riverside Gardens?" "My husband got transferred for work," I replied, shaking her hand briefly. "We wanted a community with good amenities." "Well, you've certainly found that. Of course, quality comes at a price." She picked up a cookie, examining it with distaste before setting it back down. "What do you do for a living, Barbara?" "I'm an accountant," I said, using the vague cover I'd learned to employ at social gatherings. People get nervous around IRS investigators, and I preferred to keep my actual job quiet in casual settings. "How interesting," Karen said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. "Well, I'm sure you'll appreciate how efficiently we manage the association's finances. I personally oversee every transaction." That statement should have been my first red flag. In a well-run HOA, financial oversight should be distributed among multiple board members with checks and balances. Having the president personally oversee every transaction was a recipe for fraud. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention to the little things. The urgent roof repair that supposedly cost $200,000 seemed to involve only a few workers who showed up for 3 days and then disappeared. The community center pool, which Karen claimed needed $50,000 in renovations just last year, had visible cracks and outdated equipment. At a neighborhood barbecue in late May, I met our next-door neighbor, James Rodriguez, a retired engineer in his 70s. We stood by his grill while he flipped burgers, and the conversation naturally turned to the HOA. "I've been here 8 years," James said, lowering his voice as he glanced around to make sure Karen wasn't nearby. "The special assessments started about 4 years ago, right after Karen became president. Before that, we might have won every couple of years for something major. Now we have 3 or 4 annually." "That does seem excessive," I said carefully. "That's not even the worst part." James flipped a burger with more force than necessary. "I asked to see the financial records last. It's our right as homeowners." Karen gave me a runaround for 3 months before finally producing a set of statements so vague they were practically useless. When I pressed for details, she threatened me with fines for harassing board members. My investigator instincts went into overdrive. "Did you ever get the detailed records?" "No." And 2 other residents who asked questions ended up with violation notices for ridiculous things. One guy got fined $500 because his mailbox was supposedly 2 inches too tall. James shook his head. "People are afraid to speak up now." That evening, I sat down at my home computer and did what I do best. I started digging. As a senior IRS investigator, I had access to databases and search tools that most people couldn't even imagine. What I found made my blood run cold. Karen Westbrook had purchased a home in Riverside Gardens 7 years ago for $375,000. Since then, she'd bought a vacation condo in Ciabeo, San Lucas, worth $600,000, a Mercedes S-Class sedan worth $95,000. And according to her social media posts, she took international vacations at least 4 times a year, always staying at 5-star resorts. I pulled up her tax returns for the past 5 years. Karen listed her occupation as HOA management consultant with an annual income of $68,000. Her husband was a middle school teacher, making $42,000. Together, their reported income was $110,000 per year. The numbers didn't add up. Even with generous estimates, a couple earning $110,000 couldn't afford Karen's lifestyle, not legally. Anyway, I spent the next week building a timeline. I requested public records from the county showing all the special assessments levied by Riverside Gardens HOA for the past 4 years. The total amount collected from homeowners was staggering, over $2 million. I cross-referenced these special assessments with building permits and contractor licenses. Many of the major projects that supposedly cost hundreds of thousands of dollars had no corresponding permits on file. The projects that did have permits showed costs far below what homeowners had been charged. For example, the roof replacement we'd just been assessed $3,500 for. The actual permit showed the cost as $75,000 total. With 200 homes in the community, Karen had collected $700,000 from residents. Where had the other $625,000 gone? I created a spreadsheet tracking every special assessment, every claimed expense, and every discrepancy I could find. The pattern was clear. Karen was systematically stealing from the HOA, and she'd been doing it for years. But I needed proof that would hold up in court. I needed to access the HOA's actual financial records, and I needed to trace where the missing money had gone. At the June HOA meeting, Primera Ma, day my move, I stood up during the open comment period, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "Karen, I'd like to request copies of the HOA's financial records for the past 4 years, including all bank statements, invoices for contracted work, and receipts for expenditures." The room went silent. Karen's face hardened, but she maintained her practiced smile. "We provide quarterly financial summaries to all residents. Barbara, I'm sure you received yours." I did, but as a homeowner and dues-paying member of this association, I'm entitled to review the detailed records. It's in our bylaws, Section 7, Paragraph 3. I'd done my homework. Karen's smile vanished. Those records contain sensitive information. I can't just hand them over to anyone who asks. I'm not anyone. I'm a homeowner and member of this association, and the bylaws are very clear. Any member can request financial records with 5 days written notice. I submitted my written request 8 days ago. I held up the certified mail receipt. Several residents pulled out their phones, suddenly very interested in documenting this exchange. Karen's face flushed red. This is highly irregular and, frankly, insulting to the board members who volunteer their time. I'm not insulting anyone. I'm exercising my legal rights, as specified in the governing documents we all agreed to when we purchased our homes. I kept my tone professional, the same one I used when interviewing hostile witnesses in tax fraud cases. Doug, the vice president, whispered something to Karen. She listened, her expression growing darker, then turned back to the microphone. Fine. You can pick up copies of the financial records from my office next week. There will be a 25-cent per page copying fee. That's acceptable, I said, sitting down. I'd expected her to charge the maximum allowed fee. It didn't matter. What I was about to uncover would be worth thousands of pages at a quarter each. Mark squeezed my hand. He knew that look in my eyes. It was the same expression I got when I was closing in on a major case. The following Tuesday, I arrived at Karen's home office. She ran the HOA management business from a converted garage behind her house. She handed me 3 banker's boxers with a smug expression. That'll be $475 for copying costs, she said. I wrote her a check without comment and loaded the boxers into my car. I couldn't wait to get home and start the real investigation. What I found over the next 3 weeks was breathtaking in its audacity. Karen had created a web of fake vendors, inflated invoices, and phantom expenses that would have impressed a mob accountant. She'd set up shell companies with names like Desert Landscaping Solutions and Arizona Property Services, companies that existed only on paper. These companies would bill the HOA for work that was either never done or dramatically overpriced. The checks were deposited into accounts that Karen controlled. I found invoices for a pool cleaning service charging the HOA $3,000 per month. The actual pool service, which I called in verified, was charging $600 per month. Karen was pocketing the $2,400 difference. There were receipts for emergency tree removal totaling $45,000. I drove around the entire community with James, counting trees. Not a single one had been removed in the past 2 years. The landscaping renovation that had cost homeowners $800,000 in a special assessment, the actual landscaper's invoice, which I found buried in the documents, was for $90,000. But the crown jewel was what I found when I cross-referenced the vendor addresses. 15 different companies that billed the HOA, all listed the same address, a mailbox rental facility in Scottsdale. I paid a visit to that facility and confirmed that all 15 mailboxes were rented under variations of Karen's name or her shell companies. I estimated Karen had stolen at least $900,000 over 4 years. But proving it in a way that would hold up in court required more than my analysis. I needed official IRS involvement and cooperation from local law enforcement. I scheduled a meeting with my supervisor at the IRS, Senior Special Agent Thomas Morrison. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix, away from the office to keep things discreet. Barbara, this is solid work, Tom said, reviewing my findings. But you can't investigate this yourself. You're personally involved. I know. That's why I'm bringing it to you. This needs to be an official investigation. Tom nodded slowly. I'll assign it to Martinez's team. You'll need to recuse yourself completely. No involvement. No updates. Nothing. Can you do that? I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to stay involved, to see this through personally. But I'd spent 12 years building a reputation as a bizabook investigator. I wouldn't compromise that now. Yes, I can do that. But Tom, she's going to destroy evidence if she suspects anything. The investigation needs to move fast. I'll make it a priority, he promised. 2 weeks later, I was weeding my front garden when 3 black SUVs pulled into Karen's circular driveway. Men and women in windbreakers with IRS emblazoned on the back emerged and approached her front door. I watched from behind my rose bushes as Karen answered the door in a silk robe, coffee cup in hand. Her expression went from annoyed to terrified in approximately 3 seconds when they showed her the warrant. The raid lasted 6 hours. They carried out boxes of documents, computers, and external hard drives. Neighbors gathered in clusters on the sidewalk, whispering and recording videos on their phones. Karen stood on her front lawn, now dressed in a designer tracksuit, screaming into her phone, "I want my lawyer. This is harassment. I'm the victim here." James walked over to stand beside me, a huge grin on his face. "I don't know what you did, Barbara, but thank you." "I didn't do anything," I said truthfully. "I just exercised my right to review public documents." The next HOA meeting was scheduled for July 5th. I arrived early and found the community center packed beyond capacity. Residents who'd never attended a meeting before were standing in the aisles and crowding the doorways. Karen sat at the board table, her lawyer beside her, a nervous young man who kept checking his phone. Doug and Mrs. Patterson sat as far from Karen as possible, both looking like they wished they could be anywhere else. I'd received a call the day before from Agent Martinez, the lead investigator on the case. "Mrs. Chen, I know you're recused from this investigation, but I wanted to give you a courtesy. We're going to make an arrest tomorrow. You might want to attend your HOA meeting tonight." Now, sitting in the third row, I understood why. Karen called the meeting to order, her voice shaky. "Due to ongoing legal matters, we'll be keeping tonight's meeting brief." The back doors burst open. Agent Martinez walked in, flanked by 2 other agents and a Maricopa County Sheriff's deputy. "Karen Westbrook." Agent Martinez called out. Karen stood, her face. "Yes, I'm Special Agent Martinez with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. You're under arrest for tax evasion, wire fraud, and embezzlement." He approached the board table while one of the other agents began reading Karen her rights. The room erupted in chaos. People were shouting, "So much shading," others gasping. Phones were out everywhere, recording every second. "This is a mistake," Karen shrieked as they handcuffed her. "I'm the victim. Barbara Chen has been harassing me. She's—" "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," the deputy said firmly. "I suggest you use it." They led Karen out through the center aisle. As she passed my row, our eyes met. The fury in her gaze was palpable, but underneath it, I saw something else. The dawning realization that she'd been caught by someone who knew every trick in the book, because I literally wrote some of those sections in the IRS investigation manual. After they'd taken Karen away, Agent Martinez approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to assure you that this investigation is ongoing. We've frozen the HOA accounts to preserve evidence, but we'll be working with your board to ensure minimal disruption to community services. If any of you have information relevant to this case, please contact this number." He held up a card. As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement and speculation, James approached me with tears in his eyes. "She would have kept doing this forever if you hadn't stopped her," he said. I thought about all the residents who'd been too afraid to speak up, too intimidated to question Karen's authority. I thought about the elderly homeowners on fixed incomes who'd struggled to pay those fraudulent special assessments. "Nobody's above the law," I said. "Not even an HOA president." What I didn't know then was that Karen's arrest was just the beginning. The investigation would uncover a fraud scheme even more elaborate than I'd imagined, involving multiple conspirators and reaching far beyond our little community. Have you ever dealt with a corrupt HOA board? Drop your story in the comments below, and wait until you hear what else the IRS uncovered. The morning after Karen's arrest, I woke up to find my front yard decorated with flowers and thank you notes. Neighbors I'd never spoken to before stopped by with coffee and homemade cookies. James came over with a bouquet of roses, tears streaming down his face. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said, his voice breaking. "Karen charged me $6,000 for a special assessment the month after the funeral. I had to take out a loan to pay it. I've been eating ramen noodles for months to make ends meet." I hugged him, feeling the weight of what Karen had stolen, not just money, but security, dignity, and peace of mind from people who trusted her. My phone rang constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Neighbors wanted details, but I couldn't say anything. The investigation was ongoing, and I was still technically recused from official involvement. 3 days after the arrest, Agent Martinez called me. "Senora Chen, we need you to come down to the office." Unofficially, I met him at the IRS field office in downtown Phoenix. He led me to a conference room where the walls were covered with flowcharts, timelines, and photographs. In the center was a massive evidence board that made my initial investigation look like amateur hour. "Barbara, what you uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg," Martinez said, gesturing to the board. Karen wasn't working alone. He clicked a remote, and a projector lit up the wall with a series of photographs. The first showed Doug Patterson, the HOA vice president, shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize outside a bank. Doug Patterson has been Karen's partner from the beginning. He's not the nervous pushover he pretended to be. He's a former investment banker who got fired from Merrill Lynch in 2008 for securities fraud. Never prosecuted, but his career was over. He and Karen met at some HOA conference 5 years ago and cooked up this scheme together. The next photo showed Mrs. Patterson. The elderly treasurer I'd assumed was half asleep during meetings. She was getting into a BMW 7 Series. And sweet old Mrs. Patterson, Martinez continued. She's Doug's mother. She's been signing off on fake financial statements and approving fraudulent transactions for 4 years. We found email chains where the three of them joked about bleeding the sheep dry. My stomach turned. I'd felt sorry for Doug and Mrs. Patterson, thinking they were intimidated by Karen. They'd been co-conspirators the entire time. "There's more," Martinez said grimly. He clicked to the next slide, a map showing dozens of red dots across Arizona, Nevada, and California. Karen and Doug have been running variations of this scam in 23 different HOA communities across 3 states. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. 23. They have a whole system. Karen moves into an upscale community, runs for HOA president, and immediately installs Doug as vice president or treasurer, whichever position is open. If neither position is available, Doug's mother fills in. Then they start the special assessments scam, bleed the community dry for 3 to 5 years, and move on before people get too suspicious. "How much are we talking about total?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Our preliminary estimate is north of $12 million over 8 years. The number was staggering. I sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs. $12 million stolen from homeowners, from retirees' families, people just trying to have a nice place to live. Martinez nodded. "And here's where it gets interesting for you personally. We've been tracking Karen's financial movements. She's got money hidden in accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore. But about 6 months ago, she started moving large sums to a new account, one we can't quite trace yet." He pulled up a bank statement on the screen. "See these transfers. 50,000 here, 75,000 there, 100,000 last month. All going to an LLC called Desert Phoenix Holdings. We can't find any business registration for that company in any state database." I leaned forward, studying the pattern of transfers. Something about them tickled my memory. "What dates were these transfers made?" Martinez read them off. "January 5th, February 12th, March 8th, April 19th. Those are all the days after HOA board meetings," I said suddenly. "Look, January's meeting was on the 4th. February's was on the 11th. She's transferring money the day after each meeting." "Why would that matter?" Martinez asked. "Because that's when she'd have the clearest picture of how much she could steal without raising immediate suspicion. Right after the meeting, she'd know which homeowners paid their assessments, which ones asked questions, what the general mood was. She's calculating her risk in real time." Martinez looked impressed. "Tatese? Good. That's really good. Can you help us figure out where Desert Phoenix Holdings is hiding?" "I thought I was recused from this investigation," I said with a slight smile. "You are, officially. But unofficially, you're a consultant helping us understand HOA financial structures. Totally different thing." He grinned. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Martinez's team to unravel Karen's financial web. We discovered that Desert Phoenix Holdings was registered in Delaware under a nominee service company that hides the true owners of businesses. But Karen had made a crucial mistake. To move money internationally, she needed to provide documentation to the banks, and buried in those documents was an email address she'd used to verify her identity, Westbrook_investments at a Gmail account. That email address led us to a laptop we'd seized during the raid on her house. On that laptop, we found the smoking gun, detailed spreadsheets showing every dollar stolen from every HOA, every fake vendor payment, every shell company transaction. Karen had kept meticulous records of her own crimes. Why would she document everything? Martinez wondered aloud as we reviewed the files. Because she's a narcissist, I said, thinking back to every interaction I'd had with Karen. She's proud of what she pulled off. This isn't just about money for her, it's about proving she's smarter than everyone else. She couldn't help but keep score. The spreadsheets revealed something else. Karen had been planning an exit strategy. She'd been gradually moving money offshore, and her notes indicated she planned to retire to the Cayman Islands by December 2020 for just 5 months away. We'd caught her literally months before she would have disappeared with $12 million. Meanwhile, back in Riverside Gardens, chaos reigned. With the HOA board entirely arrested, Karen, Doug, and Mrs. Patterson were all in custody. There was no one to manage the community. The pool sat unchlorinated and murky. The landscaping went Residents didn't know if they should keep paying dues or stop. A group of concerned homeowners, led by James, called an emergency meeting. Over 200 people packed into the community. Center nearly every household was represented. I attended but tried to stay in the background. James had other ideas. He spotted me trying to slip into a back row and immediately called out, Barbara Chen, please, come up here." Reluctantly, I made my way to the front as the crowd applauded. James handed me the microphone with a grateful smile. "I know many of you have questions," I began. "I can't discuss the ongoing federal investigation, but I can tell you what happens next from an HOA governance standpoint." I explained that we needed to hold elections for a new board immediately. We needed to hire a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations. And we needed to conduct a full forensic audit to determine exactly how much money had been stolen and where it had gone. "What about getting our money back?" someone shouted from the audience. "The IRS has frozen all of Karen's assets," I said. "That includes her house, her cars, her bank accounts, and any other property we can find. Eventually, there will be a restitution process where victims can file claims. But I won't lie to you, recovery in these cases is rarely 100%. These people spent a lot of the money they stole." The crowd murmured unhappily, but most seemed to accept this reality. "However," I continued, "there's also the possibility of a class action lawsuit against Karen, Doug, and Mrs. Patterson personally. Any assets they have now or acquire in the future could be subject to seizure. I'd recommend everyone here consult with the attorneys who'll inevitably be reaching out about representing the homeowners collectively." We held elections that night. James was voted in as the new president. A retired accountant named Susan became treasurer. A lawyer named Michael took the vice president role. I declined to run for any position. I'd done enough, and I wanted to return to some semblance of normal life. But normal life wasn't in the cards yet. 2 days later, I was working in my home office when my secure work phone rang. It was the number for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division's director in Washington, D.C. Mrs. Chen. "This is Director Patricia Walsh. I wanted to personally commend you on the Westbrook case. What you've uncovered has implications far beyond one HOA fraud scheme." "Thank you, Director, but I'm not sure I understand." "We've been investigating HOA fraud for years, but it's always been difficult to prosecute. The amounts are too small to trigger federal attention, and local police don't have the resources. But your case has given us a roadmap. We're seeing patterns now, connections between HOA fraud rings across multiple states." She paused, and I heard papers shuffling. "Mrs. Chen, how would you feel about leading a new task force specifically focused on HOA and property management fraud? It would be a promotion to supervisory special agent, and you'd have a team of 6 investigators under you." I was stunned. "Director Walsh, I'm honored, but I'm not sure. Think about it. You've got a week." "But Barbara, you're uniquely qualified for this. You understand both the federal tax implications and the community impact. You know how these frauds work from the inside, and you've proven you can build cases that lead to convictions." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone. Mark found me there 20 minutes later, still processing. "That good or that bad?" he asked, sitting beside me. "They want me to lead a task force investigating HOA fraud nationwide," I said. Mark whistled. "That's huge. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about James eating ramen noodles to afford Karen's fake assessments. I'm thinking about 23 communities that got victimized. I'm thinking about how many more HOAs out there have a Karen Westbrook bleeding them dry." "So you're going to take it?" Mark said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, I think I am." The following week, Karen's preliminary hearing was held at the federal courthouse. I attended as a witness, sitting in the gallery with James and several other Riverside Gardens residents. Karen was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her platinum blonde hair limp and the confident, designer-clad HOA president was gone, replaced by a woman who looked like she'd aged 10 years and 3 weeks. Her lawyer argued for bail, citing her ties to the community and lack of flight risk. The federal prosecutor, sharp woman named Jennifer Caldwell, presented evidence of Karen's offshore accounts and her documented plan to flee to the Cayman Islands. "Your Honor, the defendant has already demonstrated intent to flee the country with millions of dollars in stolen funds," Caldwell argued. "She has the means and motive to disappear if released. We're requesting she'll be held without bail pending trial." The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, named Judge Martinez, no relation to the agent, barely hesitated. "Bail denied. The defendant will remain in custody. Trial date is set for October 15th. Karen's face crumpled. She turned to look at the gallery, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. The hatred in her gaze was pure and undiluted. "This is your fault," she screamed suddenly. "You ruined everything." I was helping that community. Those improvements were necessary. The bailiffs moved quickly, restraining her as she continued to shout. "You're just jealous. You couldn't stand that I was successful. This is persecution." Judge Martinez banged her gavel. "That's enough. Remove the defendant." As they dragged Karen from the courtroom, still screaming, I felt no satisfaction, just a deep sadness for all the people she'd hurt, and a determination to make sure she faced justice. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. James spoke on behalf of the residents. Well, I tried to slip away quietly, but one reporter caught up to me in the parking garage. "Mrs. Chen, is it true you're an IRS investigator? Did you know Karen was committing fraud when you moved to the neighborhood?" "No comment," I said firmly, continuing toward my car. "Is it true you're starting a federal task force to investigate HOA fraud nationwide?" I stopped. That information wasn't public yet. Someone had leaked it. "Where did you hear that?" I asked. The reporter, a young woman with sharp eyes, smiled. "I have sources. Can you confirm?" I considered my options. The story was going to break, eventually. Might as well control the narrative. Off the record, I waited for her nod. "Yes. The IRS is taking HOA fraud seriously now. What happened in Riverside Gardens is happening in communities across the country. We're going to stop it, and you're leading that effort. I can't comment on personnel matters, but I can tell you that anyone running an HOA scam should be very, very worried right now." The reporter's eyes lit up. "Can I quote that?" "On the record." "Sure." The story ran the next day. IRS declares war on fraud task force to target corrupt community boards nationwide. My phone exploded with calls. Some were from reporters, but many dozens, then hundreds were from homeowners across the country reporting suspected fraud in their own I spent the next week just cataloging complaints. A woman in Nevada whose HOA president had bought a yacht while claiming the community was broke. A man in California whose HOA had collected $2 million for a pool renovation that never happened. An elderly couple in Florida whose HOA had foreclosed on their home over disputed fees, only for the president to buy the property at auction for pennies on the dollar. The patterns were everywhere once you knew what to look for, and I was going to find them all. But first, I had to see Karen's case through to the end. The trial was still months away, and there was still work to be done building the prosecution's case. What I didn't know was that Karen had one more surprise waiting for USA revelation that would crack the case wide open and expose a network of corruption that reached far beyond anything we'd imagined. Are you suspicious about your HOA's finances? Let us know in the comments. October 15th arrived faster than I expected. The federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and dozens of Riverside Gardens residents who'd taken the day off work to watch justice unfold. I sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing my best suit. Agent Martinez sat beside me, along with the rest of the investigative team. We'd spent 4 months building an ironclad case against Karen Westbrook, Doug Patterson, and Mrs. Patterson. Today, it all came down to 12 jurors. Karen was led into the courtroom looking remarkably composed. Her lawyer had clearly coached her. Gone was the screaming, disheveled woman from the bail hearing. Her hair was styled professionally. She wore a conservative navy suit, and her expression was calm, almost serene. Doug and Mrs. Patterson sat at separate defense tables with their own attorneys. Doug looked miserable, constantly wiping sweat from his forehead. Mrs. Patterson stared straight ahead, expressionless. Judge Martinez called the court to order. We're here for the trial of United States versus Karen Westbrook, Douglas Patterson, and Margaret Patterson. Is the prosecution ready? Jennifer Caldwell stood. Yes, Your Honor. Is the defense ready? Karen's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Robert Thornton who'd made his reputation defending white-collar criminals, rose smoothly. Yes, Your Honor. And we have a motion before we begin. Judge Martinez looked annoyed. Mr. Thornton, we've been through all the pre-trial motions. This is new information. Your Honor, we received documents yesterday that fundamentally changed the nature of this case. Thornton held up a folder. We're prepared to show that Mrs. Westbrook was acting under duress and was herself a victim of a larger conspiracy. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I exchanged shocked glances with Martinez. What was Thornton playing at? Judge Martinez banged her gavel, approached the bench. All counsel. We couldn't hear what was said during the heated discussion at the judge's bench, but Caldwell's body language screamed fury. After 10 minutes, they returned to their positions. The defense motion is denied, Judge Martinez announced. However, Mr. Thornton may present his theory during the trial itself. We'll proceed with jury selection. It took 2 full days to seat a jury. Thornton used his challenges to eliminate anyone with HOA experience or financial expertise. Caldwell fought to key people who understood complex fraud schemes. In the end, we had 12 jurors, a mix of ages, backgrounds, and occupations. On the 3rd day, opening statements began. Caldwell laid out the prosecution's case methodically. She showed the jury photographs of Karen's luxury lifestyle, the Ciabo condo, the Mercedes, the 5-star vacation receipts. She presented spreadsheets showing the $12 million stolen from 23 HOA communities. She explained how the shell companies worked, how the fake vendors operated, how Karen, Doug, and Mrs. Patterson had conspired to drain the life savings of hundreds of families. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about greed. Caldwell sighed, making eye contact with each juror. These 3 defendants saw homeowners as nothing more than They stole millions of dollars money meant to maintain communities, to keep pools safe, to repair roofs, to maintain property values. Instead, that money went to fund champagne wishes and caviar dreams, while retirees ate ramen noodles and families took out loans they couldn't afford. Then it was Thornton's turn. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. Members of the jury, you're going to hear a very different story than what the prosecution just presented. Yes, money was stolen. Yes, HOAs were defrauded. But my client Karen Westbrook was not the mastermind. She was a pawn. He walked to the defense table and picked up a photograph. This is Vincent Calabresi. He's a property developer who owns management companies across 6 states. He approached my client 8 years ago with what seemed like a legitimate business opportunity to help him identify HOAs that needed professional management services, and she'd receive a finder's fee. The photograph showed a man in his 50s with slicked-back dark hair and an expensive suit, shaking hands with Karen at what looked like a conference. What Mrs. Westbrook didn't know, Thornton continued, was that Mr. Calabresi was running a massive fraud operation. He threatened her. He said if she didn't cooperate, he'd hurt her family. He controlled her every move. She's as much a victim here as the homeowners. I nearly laughed out loud. It was the oldest offense in the book: blame someone else, claim coercion, play the victim. But Thornton was a skilled lawyer, and I could see some jurors looking thoughtful. The prosecution's case took 3 weeks to present. Caldwell called witness after witness: homeowners who'd been financially devastated, contractors who'd been asked to inflate invoices, bank officials who explained the shell company transactions. I testified on day 8. Caldwell walked me through my investigation, my discovery of the discrepancies, my analysis of the financial records. I explained how I'd traced the money, how I'd identified the pattern of fraud. On cross-examination, Thornton tried to paint me as someone with a personal vendetta against Karen. Mrs. Chun, isn't it true that you targeted my client because you were angry about the special assessment for the roof repair? No, I said calmly. I asked to review financial records because it's the right of every HOA member under the bylaws. But you used your position as an IRS investigator to launch a personal investigation into someone you didn't like. I used my expertise as a financial investigator to identify fraud. Once I confirmed my suspicions, I reported them to my supervisor and recused myself from the official investigation. Everything was done by the book. Thornton held up a document. According to this report, you spent over 80 hours analyzing HOA records before reporting anything. 80 hours of obsessing over my client, 80 hours of ensuring I had sufficient evidence to warrant a federal investigation. I interrupted. Would you prefer I waste federal resources on hunchies, or should investigators do their due diligence before involving the government? Several jurors nodded. Thornton quickly moved on. The bombshell came on day 16. Thornton called his star witness, Vincent Calabresi himself. Calabresi walked into the courtroom like he owned it. He was even more imposing in person than in photographs. Over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of casual menace. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost $5,000. After being sworn in, Calabresi confirmed Thornton's opening statement narrative. He'd recruited Karen 8 years ago. He'd threatened her family when she tried to back out. He'd controlled every aspect of the fraud. Mr. Calabresi, Thornton asked, did Mrs. Westbrook profit from these schemes? Not really, Calabresi said smoothly. I let her keep maybe 5%. The rest went to me and my organization. She was just a front woman. It was a stunning admission. Calabresi was confessing to the crimes, but in a way that made Karen look like a victim rather than a perpetrator. During a recess, I pulled Martinez aside. This doesn't make sense. Why would Calabresi testify against himself? Martinez looked grim. He's already under investigation in 3 other states. He's cut a deal, probably testimony here, in exchange for reduced charges elsewhere. And by making Karen look like a victim, he's hoping to get her acquitted, which would muddy the waters on his other cases. We need to destroy his credibility, I said. Caldwell's on it. Watch. When court reconvened, Caldwell approached Calabresi with a predatory smile. Mr. Calabresi, you've testified that you threatened Mrs. Westbrook's family. Can you provide any evidence of these threats? It was verbal, nothing written. I see. And you claim Mrs. Westbrook only kept 5% of the stolen money. Can you provide bank records showing where the other 95% went? Calabresi shifted uncomfortably. Those records are complicated. Multiple offshore accounts. Complicated. Right. Caldwell pulled out a document. Mr. Calabresi, have you been granted immunity for your testimony here today? I have an agreement with prosecutors. Yes. An agreement that gives you immunity from prosecution for the crimes you're describing in exchange for your testimony against Mrs. Westbrook. That's correct. So you have every incentive to lie on that stand, don't you? You can claim responsibility for these crimes, make Mrs. Westbrook look like a victim, and walk away without consequences. Thornton objected, but Judge Martinez overruled him. Calabresi's jaw tightened. I'm telling the truth. Are you? Let's examine that. Caldwell projected an email on the screen. "This is an email from Karen Westbrook to you, dated March 3rd, 2022. Can you read the highlighted portion for the jury?" Calabresi squinted at the screen. It says, "Vinny, the Riverside assessment went perfectly. I've got $700,000 sitting in the account. When can we meet to celebrate?" "Champagne is on me. When can we meet to celebrate?" Caldwell repeated. "Does that sound like someone acting under duress? Someone who's terrified for her family's safety? She was trying to keep me happy. Or she was a willing, enthusiastic participant in this fraud." Caldwell pulled up another email. "Here's another one, dated August 15th, 2023. This is the best partnership ever. We're going to retire rich. Your thoughts on that, Mr. Calabresi?" The next hour was brutal. Caldwell systematically destroyed Calabresi's credibility with email after email, text message after text message, all showing Karen as an eager partner, not a frightened victim. By the time Caldwell finished, even Thornton looked shaken. But the defense had one more card to play. On day 19, they called Doug Patterson to the stand. Doug had clearly made his own deal. He confirmed that he and Karen had been equal partners, but he blamed everything on her leadership. "Karen was brilliant," he said. "She came up with the entire system. I just went along with it. I was weak." Mrs. Patterson followed, playing the confused elderly woman. "I didn't understand what I was signing," she testified, her voice quavering. "Karen told me it was all legitimate. I trusted her. It was nauseating to watch, but Caldwell was ready for them too. She showed Doug's emails bragging about bleeding the sheep dry. She presented evidence that Mrs. Patterson had a degree in accounting and had worked as a CPA for 30 years. "Mrs. Patterson," Caldwell said coldly, "you're not a confused old lady. You're a calculating criminal who used your age as camouflage." The older woman's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of anger crossing her face, before she composed herself. On day 22, closing arguments began. Thornton gave an impassioned speech about reasonable doubt, about the possibility that Karen had been coerced, about the unreliability of Calabresi's testimony cutting both ways. Caldwell's closing was masterful. She reminded the jurors of every piece of evidence: emails, the bank records, the luxury purchases, the victims who'd testified about losing their homes and savings. Karen Westbrook is a con artist. Caldwell sighed, standing before the jury box. She saw decent people trying to maintain their communities, and she saw opportunity. She didn't care that James Rodriguez was eating ramen to afford her fake assessments. She didn't care that the Martinez family lost their home to foreclosure. She cared about her CABO condo and her Mercedes and her 5-star vacations. Caldwell paused, making eye contact with each juror. "The defense wants you to believe she was a victim. But victims don't email their supposed tormentors saying, 'Champagne is on me.' Victims don't keep detailed spreadsheets of their crimes. Victims don't plan retirement getaways to the Cayman Islands with stolen millions." She turned to look at Karen. "That woman is not a victim. She's a predator, and it's time she faced consequences for what she's done." The jury deliberated for 2 days. I barely slept, constantly checking my phone for updates. James called me every few hours, anxiety clear in his voice. Finally, on October 25th, we got the call. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed even tighter than opening day. I held my breath. As the jury filed in, none of them looked at the defendants a good sign. Usually, Judge Martinez called the court to order. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman, a middle-aged teacher, stood. "We have, Your Honor, in the case of United States versus Karen Westbrook, on the count of tax evasion, how do you find?" "Guilty." Karen's face went white. "On the count of wire fraud, guilty? On the count of embezzlement, guilty?" The foreman continued through all 17 counts. "Guilty, guilty, guilty, guilty." Karen collapsed back into her chair, her lawyer grabbing her arm to steady her. Doug put his head in his hands. Mrs. Patterson sat motionless, but I could see tears on her cheeks. The verdicts for Doug and Mrs. Patterson followed, guilty on all counts for both of them. The courtroom erupted in applause and cheers from the Riverside Gardens residents. Judge Martinez didn't even try to quiet them, letting the celebration continue for a full minute before banging her gavel. "Sentencing is scheduled for December 10th, she announced. "Defendants will remain in custody. Court is adjourned." As the bailiffs led the 3 convicted criminals away, Karen turned one last time to look at me. The hatred was gone, replaced by something like resignation. She mouthed something I couldn't quite make out. "Maybe I'm sorry. Maybe I hate you." It didn't really matter anymore. Outside the courthouse, James hugged me so hard he lifted me off the ground. "We won. Barbara, we actually won." Other residents surrounded us, crying and laughing and thanking me over and over. I felt a wave of emotion wash over merely satisfaction and a bone-deep weariness. A reporter pushed through the crowd. "Mrs. Chen, how does it feel to take down one of the biggest HOA fraud rings in American history?" I thought about my answer carefully. "It feels like justice. But this case is just the beginning. There are Karen Westbrooks operating in communities across this country. The task force I'm leading is going to find them. What's your message to other corrupt HOA board members?" I looked directly into the camera. "We're coming for you. You might think you're safe, that your fraud is too small to matter, that no one's paying attention. But somewhere in your community, there might be someone like me, someone who knows how to read financial statements, how to spot discrepancies, how to follow the money. And when we find you, you'll face the same fate as Karen Westbrook." The segment aired on the evening news. By morning, my office had received 372 new complaints about suspected HOA fraud. The work was just beginning, but watching Karen Westbrook led away in handcuffs, knowing she'd spend the next decade or more in federal prison, I felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything I'd experienced in my 12 years at the IRS. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it takes someone willing to ask questions when everyone else is too intimidated. Sometimes it takes an IRS investigator who happens to move into the wrong neighborhood at exactly the right time. What sentence do you think Karen deserves? Comment below. December 10th arrived with unexpected snow in Phoenix, a rare occurrence that felt almost symbolic. The federal courthouse looked like a scene from a holiday card. White flakes dusting the palm trees outside. The sentencing hearing drew an even bigger crowd than the verdict. Every seat in the courtroom was filled, with people standing along the walls. I recognized faces from Riverside Gardens, but also saw residents from the other 22 communities Karen had victimized over the years. Karen was led and wearing the same orange jumpsuit she'd worn to every hearing since her conviction. 2 months in jail had changed her dramatically. Her platinum blonde hair had grown out, showing dark roots. She'd lost weight, her face gaunt and hollow. The confident HOA president was completely gone. Doug and Mrs. Patterson sat at separate tables, both looking equally diminished. Doug had aged a decade, his hair now completely gray. Mrs. Patterson seemed smaller somehow, hunched in her chair. Judge Martinez called the court to order. "Before I impose sentence, I'm going to hear victim impact statements. I understand we have quite a few people who wish to speak." James was first. He walked slowly to the podium, gripping a piece of paper with shaking hands. "Your Honor, my name is James Rodriguez. I'm 73 years old, and I'm a widower. My wife Maria died 3 years ago after a long battle with cancer." His voice broke, and he paused to compose himself. "The month after her funeral, Karen Westbrook charged me $6,000 for a special assessment that I now know was completely fake. I had to take out a high-interest loan to pay it. I've been living on $900 a month from Social Security, trying to pay off that loan while eating 1 meal a day." He looked directly at Karen. "You knew my wife had just died. You came to the funeral, and then you stole from me when I was at my lowest point. I want you to know that every night I went to bed hungry. I thought about what you did. I thought about how someone could be so cruel." Karen's lawyer whispered something to her, and she nodded slightly, but she didn't look at James. Next was a woman named Susan Martinez. No relation to the judge or the agent. She was in her 40s, a single mother of 3. "I lost my home because of Karen Westbrook," she said. her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face. I was a teacher, making $42,000 a year, raising 3 kids alone after my husband left. When Karen hit us with back-to-back special assessments totaling $11,000, I couldn't pay. The HOA foreclosed on my house, the house where my children grew up, where we had every birthday party and Christmas morning. She pulled out a photograph. This is my daughter Emma, on the day we had to move out. She was 12. She's holding her cat, and she's crying because we had to move into a 2-bedroom apartment across town, which meant changing schools and leaving all her friends. That's what your greed cost us, Karen. You didn't just steal money. You stole my children's childhood. One by one, victims approached the podium. An elderly couple who'd lost their retirement savings, a veteran who'd been threatened with foreclosure, a young family who'd had to declare bankruptcy. Each story was more heartbreaking than the last. After the 15th victim statement, Judge Martinez held up her hand. I think we've heard enough to establish the pattern and scope of harm. Does the defense wish to make a statement before sentencing? Karen's lawyer, Thornton, stood. Yes, Your Honor. My client wishes to address the court. This was unexpected. Thornton had advised against it during the trial, but apparently Karen had insisted. Karen stood slowly, walking to the podium with her hands cuffed in front of her. She'd prepared a statement, but her hands shook so badly she could barely read it. Your Honor, I want to say I'm sorry. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I know that doesn't mean anything to the people I hurt. I know saying sorry doesn't give them back their money or their homes or their peace of mind. But I need to say it anyway. She looked up from her paper, scanning the crowd of victims. I told myself I was just taking a little bit from each person. I convinced myself that everyone could afford it, that I deserved it for all the work I did managing the HOA. But those were lies. I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew I was stealing from people who trusted me. A tear rolled down her cheek. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just want everyone to know that I will spend every day for the rest of my life regretting what I did. I destroyed lives for money I didn't even need. I became a monster, and I'm sorry. She sat down, putting her face in her hands. I watched her carefully, trying to determine if this was genuine remorse or a calculated performance for the judge. Having spent 12 years interviewing white-collar criminals, I'd seen both. Doug spoke next, offering a similar apology. Mrs. Patterson declined to speak, sitting silently with her lawyer whispering in her ear. Then it was time for sentencing. Judge Martinez had a reputation as a tough but fair jurist. I'd researched her ostensibly she'd sentence white-collar criminals to significant prison time before, but she also considered mitigating factors carefully. I've presided over many fraud cases in my 20 years on the bench, Judge Martinez began. I've seen corporate executives steal millions. Ponzi schemers destroy thousands of lives, and corrupt officials betray public trust. But this case disturbs me in a way few others have. She looked directly at Karen. Mrs. Westbrook, you didn't steal from wealthy corporations or sophisticated investors. You stole from your neighbors. You stole from retirees living on Social Security. You stole from single mothers struggling to raise their children. You stole from veterans, from working families just trying to maintain a decent home. The judge paused, flipping through papers. The prosecution has calculated that you personally profited approximately $4,200,000 over 8 years. But the total amount stolen from all victims exceeds $12 million. The emotional and financial devastation you've caused is incalculable. Karen's shoulders began to shake with sobs. The defense has argued that you were coerced by Vincent. The jury rejected that argument, and so do I. The evidence shows you were an enthusiastic, willing participant who bragged about your crimes and planned to retire on your stolen wealth. Judge Martinez looked at the sentencing guidelines. The federal sentencing guidelines recommend 120 to 150 months for crimes of this magnitude. However, I'm going to exceed those guidelines based on the exceptional harm you've caused and the brazen nature of your crimes over such an extended period. She picked up her gavel. Karen Westbrook, I hereby sentence you to 240 months, 20 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will also pay full restitution to all victims, totaling $12,347,000, plus interest. Any assets you have now or acquire in the future will be subject to seizure until that debt is paid in full." The courtroom erupted in applause. Karen collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. 20 years meant she'd be nearly 70 when released her life. As she knew it was over, Doug received 15 years. Mrs. Patterson, given her age and lesser role, received 10 years. All three would serve their sentences in federal prison with no possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led them away, Karen looked back one final time. Our eyes met across the courtroom. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." I was stunned. "Thank you. For what?" Later, Agent Martinez explained it to me over coffee. "You gave her an ending," he said. She was spiraling out of control, stealing more and more, unable to stop herself. Eventually, she would have made a mistake and gotten caught anyway, or worse. Calabresi would have had her killed to cover his tracks. You stopped her before she destroyed herself completely. I wasn't sure I bought that interpretation, but it was an interesting thought. The restitution process took months to sort out. The seized assets, Karen's houses, cars, bank accounts, jewelry, were liquidated and distributed to victims. It totaled approximately $3,700,000, leaving a shortfall of over $8 million. However, the class action lawsuit against the 3 defendants and Vincent Calabresi resulted in additional recoveries. Calabresi, facing prosecution in multiple states, agreed to pay $4 million as part of a settlement. Doug's assets added another $500,000. Mrs. Patterson had hidden money in accounts under her late husband's name that added $600,000 more. In the end, victims recovered approximately $8,800,000, about 70% of what was stolen. It wasn't perfect, but it was far better than most fraud cases achieved. James got back every penny he'd lost, plus interest. Susan Martinez received enough to make a down payment on a new house. Most victims received substantial compensation, though nothing could truly make them whole. As for me, I accepted the position leading the IRS task force on HOA and property management fraud. We established offices in 6 major cities and hired 24 investigators. In our first year, we identified and prosecuted fraud in 47 HOA communities across 12 states. We recovered over $30 million for victims and sent 19 corrupt board members to federal prison. The work was exhausting, but deeply satisfying. Every case reminded me why it mattered. Every victim who got their money back made the long hours worthwhile. Riverside Gardens thrived under new management. James served as president for 2 years before stepping down to enjoy his retirement. The community used some of the recovered funds to make long overdue improvements. The pool was properly renovated. The landscaping was restored, and the community center got the roof repair it had supposedly received years ago. Property values in Riverside Gardens increased by 18% over the next 2 years, recovering from the stigma of the fraud scandal. I still live there. Mark and I have made wonderful friends in the community. Every time I drive through those tree-lined streets, I think about how close Karen came to getting away with it all. If I'd been just a little less curious, a little more willing to accept her explanations, she'd be sitting on a beach in the Cayman Islands right now, drinking champagne bought with stolen money. But I wasn't, and she isn't. 3 years after the sentencing, I received a letter from Karen. It was postmarked from the federal women's prison in Dublin, California. I debated throwing it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was surprisingly thoughtful. Karen wrote about her prison experience, the therapy she was receiving, and the financial literacy classes she was teaching to other inmates. She'd earned her accounting degree years ago, and now she was using that knowledge to help women avoid the financial mistakes that led them to crime. "I can't undo what I did," she wrote. "I can't give those people back the years of security and peace of mind I stole, but I can try to prevent other people from making the same terrible choices I made. It's not redemption, I don't deserve that, but it's something." She ended the letter with, "You were right to stop me. I was out of control, and I couldn't stop myself." In a strange way, You saved my life by ending the life I was living. I'll never forgive myself for what I did, but I'm grateful that someone finally held me accountable. I never responded to the letter. What would I say? You're welcome for sending you to prison. But he kept it filed away with all my case materials. The last time I testified before Congress about HOA fraud prevention, a senator asked me what ordinary homeowners could do to protect themselves. Pay attention, I said. Read your financial statements. Ask questions when something doesn't make sense. Attend HOA meetings. Request detailed records. And most importantly, never be intimidated into silence. Karen Westbrook counted on people being too polite, too busy, or too afraid to question her authority. The moment someone challenges fraud, the whole scheme starts to unravel. I paused, thinking about James and all the other victims who'd suffered in silence. You don't need to be an IRS investigator to spot financial fraud. You just need to care enough to look closely and be brave enough to speak up when something's wrong. That soundbite went viral. I received thousands of messages from homeowners across the country who'd started reviewing their own HOA finances. Many found irregularities. Some found outright fraud. Each discovery was another Karen Westbrook who wouldn't get away with it. The case changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'd always been good at my job, but I'd approached it as just that, a job. Cases were puzzles to solve, criminals were targets to catch, and victims were statistics in reports. After Riverside Gardens, I understood viscerally what white-collar crime really means. It's not a victimless crime or a sophisticated financial scheme. It's stealing security from elderly people. It's taking homes from families. It's destroying trust in the institutions that hold communities together. Every case I work now, I think about James eating ramen, about Susan's daughter crying while holding her cat, about all the people who trusted Karen and had that trust weaponized against them. And I think about the letter Karen sent me, about redemption and accountability, about how even the worst among us might find some way to contribute something positive, even from prison. 20 years is a long sentence. Karen will be 69. When she's released, her life as she knew it is over. But maybe, just maybe, she'll come out the other side as someone who can help prevent others from making her mistakes. Or maybe that's just wishful thinking from someone who still wants to believe people can change. Either way, justice was served. The victims got compensation. The fraud was exposed and stopped. And HOA boards across America learned a valuable lesson. Someone is always watching. Someone is always questioning. And eventually, someone like me will follow the money. Karen Westbrook gambled that she was smarter than everyone else. She bet that no one would care enough to investigate, that the amounts were too small to matter, that her authority was unquestionable. She lost that bet the day I moved into Riverside Gardens. She didn't know I worked for the IRS, but more importantly, she didn't know that I care about justice, that I understand how to read financial statements, and that I'm willing to spend 80 hours analyzing records to protect my community. That was her biggest mistake, and it cost her everything. What's the craziest HOA story you've experienced? Share in the comments. And remember, if something doesn't add up in your HOA finances, don't be afraid to ask questions. You might just be the next Barbara Chen.